If you have thin, fine hair, you should definitely stay away from these 5 hairstyles. They can make your hair look thinner, have less volume, and even make your hair look less healthy. Now, I've been a hairstylist for 30 years, and I've worked on tens of thousands of clients. And I'm very aware that you want your hair to have more volume, to look denser, and to look as healthy as possible. And with that said, I've also learned that the styles I'm about to share with you just kind of work against you and all of that. All right, now before we hop into these, you need to understand that these are my opinions. So if you're wearing currently one of the styles that I'm talking about and you feel confident and you look great and you love it, then you need to rock that style and you need to ignore what I tell you. Now, you also need to understand the difference between thin, fine hair. I know that I'm kind of using them interchangeably, but thin talks to the amount of actual hair you have, or the density, and fine talks to the texture of hair you have. So you could have coarse hair that is very thin, but you could also have fine hair that is not thin at all. Now, if you have medium or thick amounts, a dense amount of fine hair, then these styles may not be as much of a struggle for you. Okay, hairstyle number 1 is the super long look. Okay, before you jump to the comments to freak out, let me explain myself. First of all, when I'm referring to the super long look, I really mean like if you're longer than your bra strap in the back, right? Think lower back or closer to the lower back. That is a length that can be very hard for thin, especially fine texture if it's thin, to grow to. So what happens is, regardless of any texture, everybody's hair will do this to some extent. The further it gets from the neckline, the thinner it starts to look at the very ends. Now, the concern with thin, fine hair here is that it's going to be shorter and start to look thinner, or look thinner faster. Now, the real concern for you is that, one, when we look at hair, especially at the baseline in the back, if it looks thin, we subconsciously just consider that to look a little bit less healthy. So if you want your hair to look healthier, we need to make that line as strong and as dense as possible. So the way you navigate this is you look at the back and you say, where is that hair starting to look thin? And wherever it's starting to look thin in the back, that kind of ends up being the length that you have as your longest length. As it starts to get longer than that, it's going to start looking thinner. So you kind of know what your limits are or where your boundaries are. Now, the other concern with this is as it starts to look thinner at the bottom, if you go in to try to achieve a layering that's going to create more potential for volume in your hair and potentially even make some of the top look a little bit denser, it's not going to support that layering at all because it already looks thin and doesn't have enough of a foundation there to begin with. So you really want to have that back length be as long as it can be if you want longer hair to look strong, but not longer than that because it's never going to look stronger. It's just going to get thinner and thinner and thinner. Style number 2 is the long to medium length layered look. All right. I'm not telling you should have layers. Realistically, a lot of people that have thin, fine hair are very wary of layers to begin with. But what happens is if you look at the bottom and you try to layer that too much, this is a look that actually becomes very problematic because your hair is already on the thin side. And when you layer hair like that, it ends up looking even thinner. Now it looks too thin, doesn't support any sort of shape, and ends up just kind of making everything look thinner because you can kind of start to see through those ends. Okay, style number 3 is the lob. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the lob is basically just a long bob. Now, the reason that this is a concern is because if you've got thin, fine hair and it's at this length, it's kind of a little bit of an in-between length. So it just kind of ends up hanging there. It can be really hard to get any sort of lift or movement in it, and you'll end up just kind of struggling with it. Now, this is a little bit more specific to kind of the one length lob look. Could you have a lob that has some layering and some movement in it? Yeah, that would be a lot better of a move for you. However, this is still, because of the length, once you start to layer it, it's a little bit less advantageous for you than if you were just to bring that length up a little bit more, get it up off of the shoulders, because you're going to allow those layers to go a little bit shorter, which is going to make them lighter and going to give you the ability to get a lot more volume and movement in that bob. The longer bobs just don't give you as much opportunity as going a little bit shorter with them would. Okay, number 4 is the medium all one length. First of all, this might seem very similar to a lob shape. This is more of just kind of a length that's all one length, having hair roughly down to your collarbone or a little bit longer. Big concern here is, and I know that this might ruffle a little bit of feathers because I'm sure that there are a handful of you that are very concerned about doing layers, rightfully so, but having this all one length doesn't give you the ability to have your hair light enough to create volume like you want to see. So here's the misconception about layering. The original number 2 that I mentioned about medium length, where it was overly layered at the bottom, that's layering in your case done incorrectly. So for thin, fine hair, when it's got too many layers at the bottom, it's a problem. However, in this scenario, we're saying, let's not layer it and let's leave it all one length. That's another cut. But that's not gonna work for you either because it gets so heavy. So what you do instead is you actually just layer the very top and you leave the bottom kind of one length. So basically everything below the recession here, so this line right here to my occipital bone, all of this stuff basically stays one length, and then the top has some layers, and there can be some layers in the front as well. In fact, that I would absolutely say to do. When you go about it like that, will your hair feel thinner technically? Yes, a little bit, but at the same time, you're gonna be able to get a lot more volume and shape in your style, and so you're gonna give a little bit of that density at the very bottom, but you're gonna get a lot of the illusion of more volume, which can create even more of an illusion of density. Big one is the pixie where it's just too short on top. Probably this is one of the biggest issues I see in general in hair, but especially in short hair. Tell me if you've ever been in this situation before. You've got short hair, you feel like it's a little bit flat, you should be getting more volume, so you think, hey, we need to take the top a little bit shorter because I want to get a little bit more lift. It's just getting heavy. So the top goes shorter, but something feels off with the haircut, and maybe you just can't pinpoint what it is. 9.9 out of 10 times is that the top is just too short for everything else. So what you end up with is this little tiny cap of volume on top, and then it indents right here around the temples, and then you get a little bit of fullness on the sides, and the balance feels off because it's getting lift, but not really lift where you want it to get lift. Short hair does actually do a good job of making thinner hair look denser. However, having enough length in the correct areas will give you a better shape, and that means, one, it'll be easier for you to style on a day-to-day basis because you will be enhancing the shape that's already in the haircut versus you trying to create a shape that isn't there. And also it will grow out better because it's in a better balance. Get a little bit of length, you'll get more control. That control allows you to create volume where you want it. And that volume makes the overall shape look more dense. And because you have all of those things playing together, it tends to grow out better and it tends to overall just look better. Okay, so that's 5 hairstyles that you should definitely stay away from if you've got thin, fine hair. If you want to learn more about thin, fine hair, I've got a lot of content, but this video right here I think you're really gonna like. So why don't you go check that out, and I'll see you over there.